Hi guys, it's Vanessa from The Cozy Chapter, and today I'm going to share with you the books I read in September. This month I read 8 books. A couple of them are audiobooks and most of them were physical books. For some reason, I haven't really been in the audiobook mood. I have been giving lower ratings to fiction books that I read that I listen to in audio. I just have really been enjoying physical books lately. The first book I read was The Blue Zones by Dan Buettner. I know I'm kind of late to the game on this. I finally watched the Netflix documentary about the Blue Zones, and of course, like readers do, is they have to read a book about something that they watch a show about or a movie and learn more about. It was a really interesting book. The Blue Zone concept is super interesting to me. If you're not familiar with the Blue Zones, it's about areas around the world that they refer to as Blue Zones, where it has the highest populations of centenarians, people that live to be over 100. The documentary and both the book go into why they think that those Blue Zones do exist and what are the aspects about their community, of their food, of their lifestyle that contribute to these people living long, healthy lives. The next book is Blue Sisters by Coco Malors. I gave this book 3 stars, which now thinking back on it, I did enjoy it. So I'm not exactly sure why I rated it not maybe 4 stars, because the characters were excellent. This book is about 4 sisters and one of them dies and the other 3 sisters are left to obviously deal with the grief and the things that happen and all the feelings and everything that occurs after you lose a family member that's so close to you. This book is about grief. This book is about family and loss. I think the interesting part about this book is that it takes place a year later. So we know that obviously there's all these tragic feelings and after effect after someone immediately dies, but a year later, there's still things that linger and exist and will still continue to exist. The next book is Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. I don't usually read this many nonfiction books. I prefer fiction, but I ended up reading 2 this month. This book is about why you can't pay attention and how to think deeply again. It's a book about how our attention spans are so much smaller, I guess, than they used to be. And he talks a lot about social media and the algorithm and the polarization of our society and how that has pushed us to have shorter attention spans. And it's very interesting how he deep dives into what is causing our focus. And the story begins with him, he goes on this secluded vacation sort of thing where he is, for several months, he is away from his phone and all internet, all social media, all those types of things. And he describes the effects of what that's like and how that affects his attention. The next is Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. In my fall recommendations video, I talked about this being the book that is most closely like in The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. So if you are an Invisible Life of Addie LaRue fan, I would give this one a go. It follows these 3 women through different periods of time, and one is in the 1500s, one is in the 1800s, and one is in more present day. This book is about vampires, and a lot of people have said this book is about toxic lesbian vampires, and there definitely is an element of that. I really enjoyed this book. I did give it 3 stars, and the reason I gave it 3 stars is while I enjoyed it, I enjoyed the characters, I enjoyed the stories and how those stories intertwined. I do feel like it could have done with like 100 pages less. I mean, I may be the only one that thinks that, but that's kind of how I felt. By the last 100 pages, I was like, oh, okay, I kind of get where this is gonna go. And I thought the ending was gonna be a little bit more surprising, but I feel like that's kind of what I expected. The next book is P.S. I Hate You by Lauren Connolly. And I've had this book on my shelf for a little bit, and I finally decided to reach for it because I was in the mood for a romance to get enraptured in. This book, I gave 5 stars. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I love the characters. I had to read this book because many years ago when the book P.S. I Love You came out, I absolutely devoured that, and I watched the movie and I absolutely loved that as well. This is a take on that book, P.S. I Love You, except instead of her husband dying and leave behind these letters and these things that she's supposed to do, her brother is the one that dies, and the love interest is her brother's best friend. It's an enemies to lovers story, and there's something that happens earlier on in their lives that has caused them to be enemies, and that's part of like the thing that propels you along, that gets you to want to know what was that thing, what's the misunderstanding. In the story, her brother passes away, and at his funeral, she finds out that she has letters and she is supposed to take his ashes to different locations around the United States. And at each location, there will be a letter that she can open that will give her a little bit about her brother. The caveat is that she is supposed to go on these trips with her brother's best friend. So it's a brother's best friend trope and enemies to lovers. Once again, I gave this book 5 stars. I enjoyed it. I had fun. And I tend to give books 5 stars if I get that feeling where I'm so into it, they kind of forget that I'm reading. And I did have this with this book. So if I can get that feeling, it's usually an automatic 5 star for me. The next book is First Time Caller by B.K. Borison. And this book I really, really enjoyed, and I gave it 3.5 stars. The reason that I gave it 3.5 stars is more a pacing issue. I loved the characters. I loved Lucy and I loved Aiden. So the premise to the story is it's based on Sleepless in Seattle, and she is a single mom mechanic, and her daughter calls into this radio station where Aiden, it talks about love, and they end up starring in this radio show together, and they're trying to find a date or a boyfriend for her, and they obviously end up falling in love. I really, really like the characters. It was dual POV, and so he was a little bit grumpy, and I think one of the issues I sometimes have with romances when the man is grumpy is when we don't have his perspective, so we're not seeing why he's grumpy, and ultimately that takes away from the story for me because I get too caught up in the fact that he's so grumpy, and I'm like, why are you being nice to him? He's so grumpy and being so mean. And so there's like these little moments of it where he's grumpy, but he's ultimately very, very sweet, and because you get his perspective, you can see what's going on in his mind. But like I said, just something about the pacing at the end of the story, it didn't sit right with me. So that is why I rated it 3.5 stars versus maybe a 4-star read. The next book was Sunrise and the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, which I listened to. This book is a prequel to The Hunger Games, and I was really, really anticipating this book, and I heard a lot of great reviews about it. But for some reason, this book was just underwhelming to me, which is surprising. And I want to say that's maybe because I listened to it and I didn't read it physically. I really think I would have enjoyed it more if I read it physically. But this is the story of Haymitch, Katniss's mentor from the Hunger Games, and this is his story of when he was in the Hunger Games. And I just, for some reason, listening to it, maybe because I listened to it over such a long period of time, I just kind of felt like there was this disconnect. I wasn't as connected to the story and the characters. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not saying don't read this book. I gave it 3 stars. It wasn't bad. It's just something missed the mark for me, and I have heard really good reviews about this book, so I want to say this is a me thing and not a book thing. Comment down below if you've read this book and what you thought of it. The final book is Lucky Day by Chuck Tingle, and I do not know what I really rate this book. Sometimes when I was reading it, I'm like, this is a 3-star read, and then other times I'm like, are we closer to 5 stars? Are we 3.5 stars? First of all, this book is such an obscure premise, and the premise is why I read this book. So it is about a woman who is a statistics and probability professor. And in the beginning of the story, you find out about this low probability event that occurred. And it's a day that 8 million people were just killed in the most obscure ways. There were people that were strangled by balloon ropes, torn apart by exploding manhole covers, attacked by a chimpanzee wielding a typewriter. So these people are killed in these really obscure, strange, macabre ways, and you don't really understand why that happened. You just know that it happened. And then the story takes place 4 years in the future when a government agent comes to the main character's door, the statistics and probability professor, and says there's this casino that is having this alarming amount of luck and possibly some connection to this low probability event, and you have all this statistics and probability experience. Can you help us? And I really don't want to say too much more about this story because it is about 228 pages. Yeah, it's about 228 pages. So it goes really fast. I think this book, if you are gonna read it, you should read it in one sitting. This would be like a great book if you were on an airplane, and it really propels you along because you just cannot understand like where the story is gonna go a lot of the time. And there were times when I was reading it, I'm like, is this book genius or is this book nuts? And there's still things that I'm like, what? And going into it, I didn't realize that it is a sci-fi horror. I guess I didn't know about the horror element, and it makes sense because it's all these macabre, very obscure deaths that are very gruesome. I'm doing a really bad job describing this book. I feel like I'm just rambling, and which sometimes is kind of how I felt when I was reading this book. I ultimately gave it 4 stars because I just can't figure it out, and I think it ultimately had these fantastic things, and there were these things that I related to. I read this a little bit when I did my reading vlog that I just posted recently, and I talked about the low probability event and the fact that she's a statistics and probability professor being these extreme cases, but had this element of something that I could relate to because she has a hard time coping with the low probability event because she's so guided by statistics. So that I could relate to because we, as people, we look at the world and we try to find patterns because it helps us to try and understand the world. We seek these patterns and we seek things to go a certain way, and it can throw us off if they don't go that way. So I could relate to that. And there were also a lot of concepts or themes at the end that were really resonating, and I almost don't want to say like what those themes are just because it's so short and I don't want to give it away. I don't know if any of these ramblings made any sense to you or sound interesting to you. Check it out. But yeah, that was the last book that I read this month. So all of the links for the books will be in the description below if you want to check them out. That's everything that I read for this month. Please comment below your favorite book that you read in September. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and have a good day.